Okay, so we're going to be drawing with white chalk on black paper. I've sent you your reference. I'm working from this as a reference photo, as you can see on the screen. The first thing that I would notice is that the process is really not any different from the black and white media as far as the steps. So working from general to particular, from primary to secondary to tertiary detail, from diagrammatic drawing to contour to tone, from a gestural kind of free-flowing simplification of shape into a more complex, more specific, more proportionately accurate rendering that's tighter and more naturalistic. So the first thing that I notice about this particular image is that it is has a kind of diagonal movement from here to here with that leg bone, and then the skull has an axis that's something like that. So literally there's like a Y shape. And again, I don't know how much I can stress. And this is the last drawing of the class, so I really want to express how important it is that you start to really, think about what it is that I've been telling you. Some of you are still starting off trying to draw things perfectly, and you're still getting bad results. So, if you keep trying to do the same thing over and over again and the results are not working out, then there's probably something wrong with your process. So once I've done this, then I start thinking about, oh, look, there's a big mass here, and there's a big mass here. There's a circular form here at the back of the fox skull that is directly across and in line with the bone. The skull has a kind of conical form towards the front, and it overlaps the bone. As I move out to the edge of the bone, it gets thicker towards the base and thinner towards the middle. There's a curving that's happening. Notice that I drew over the skull, and then kind of a curving, and then a reverse curve, so very shallow S curve. Now once that happens, then I can say, oh, look, there's a ball shape, a spherical shape there. So everything breaks down into simple forms: cylinder, sphere. In a minute we'll see a plane on the side of the fox's head. Go ahead and get some directional marks with the drapery, just like we did in our drapery drawing. Okay, here I see more of a straight line with two protrusions. Really looking at this negative space here. Notice that right down the center there, you have a side plane and a top plane. The oculus, the eye socket, is a circular shape at first. This side, because it's 3/4 view, is going to be elliptical. The nasal cavity is also kind of an elliptical form towards the front of the face. So you can see how I'm simplifying everything down into basic shapes. So I've got my primary shapes, and then I'm breaking it down into secondary shapes. Now I can start thinking a little bit more tonally. And to me, it's a good idea to put tone before tertiary detail, because tone is big, especially when you have something like this. I'm going to put a little piece of tape at the top so that my drawing stops doing this. So this really bright tone that runs up the side of the fox's head, very dense. And then you have kind of a transitionary middle tone here, so a little bit less pressure. You can see how there's much greater pressure in here. because this area is much brighter. You can see that clearly in the photograph. Same thing here. This is not black, this is black. So if it's not black, it's got to be gray. And gray means very little pressure. So very little pressure there. Very little pressure in here because it's kind of murky. This, also very little pressure. Also very little pressure here. Same thing up here. So you can see I'm roughing in those kind of local values. The top of the skull is in shadow. You can see right now that that nasal cavity is too far to the right. You can see there's very little space between it and the edge of the form, just like that oculus is presenting very little space between it and the edge of the form. Now I can start using contour. To give myself a little bit more definition and some of those tertiary marks and details. I want you to notice how quickly I'm drawing. I'm not counting teeth. You know, it's awkward, or it's going to be awkward at first, that shadow line, to think negatively. And I don't mean Eeyore, I mean the reverse. You're drawing the light instead of the shadow. But you'll get the hang of it the more that you do it. Now, this area in here and in here is very blank in the photograph. So sometimes we need to exaggerate what we're seeing. So I might, at this point, maybe start to blend and just let some of that tone spill into those areas. Remember, as you blend, try to think about cross contour drawing. But by blending into these areas, you're going to get some of your transitionary tones. You are going to reduce, say, the value of that white. But that's okay, because you're going to buy yourself some of your transitionary tones. Those middle grays that we seem to always be missing. Flat. Rounded. Flat. Rounded. You also will lose some of the shape there, but you can still see the delineation of dark and light in the drawing. Now I could imagine that, you know, there's kind of a movement this way, and then there's probably a dip down here where it's a flat surface. This probably moves down and then under the bone. So I'm, you know, kind of creating a sense of that directionality, just like cross contour drawing. Now, up in here I see very little, but I'm going to go ahead and just modulate by pulling some of that tone around. Okay. The next thing that I would do is I would start to pull back some of the black and soften the transition into these lighter zones. I see a gradation here. I also see a texture, so I might want to experiment with, you know, starting to get that texture just by tapping and smudging and squiggling. Same thing over here. I notice that as that line goes behind the skull, it gets darker. So let it get lighter as it comes away. It gets darker as it goes behind the skull here too. Okay, so now you have a kind of rough underdrawing. Now, once that's done, you're probably going to want to get your smaller eraser or a pencil eraser. And I'm going to start erasing out some of these dark areas. Not too much, so I'm using very little pressure, but I want to get that top plane clearly established. And you'll notice that it's very linear, almost like hatching. But watch what happens when I blend. I get rid of the hatching, and I have that darker tone that I want on top. Now I see a kind of little line here, and a little line here. The nasal cavity is definitely dark, especially back as it goes underneath the top part of the snout. Same thing here, it gets darker as it goes in. There's this little hinge here. And then there's some areas in between the teeth. Here, I won't try to be too specific with them right at this moment because I'm going to draw the teeth on top of them. I need to work out this part a little bit more. Lighten it a little bit more. Blend it out. Definitely see that little ridge there. So erase the negative space on the other side of that ridge. I noticed that there's more of a contrast here at this light area. So I'm going to pull it out darker there. But you'll notice that I'm not erasing all the way back to black. And then blend it in, and that gives me greater contrast. Also noticing that this goes behind this, so I want to go ahead and exaggerate that overlap by making this get darker as it goes behind the edge of that ball joint. You can also make some corrections to the shape. Maybe make some corrections to the shape up here too while I'm at it. Really look at that negative space in between. Erase it and blend back on top of it. Okay, you can start to see that I'm getting a little bit more. I'm going to exaggerate that light even more so that I really get a sense that that's going underneath the bone, and there's a cast shadow there, even though I can't see it. I know what a cast shadow looks like. I might also kind of exaggerate the edge of this. Not too much though. Carry up the edge of it by using the negative space. And notice that this gets softer as it goes behind that ball joint. And then I can make that point clearer by going a little bit lighter inside the ball joint. remember, it's not bad to have contour line. It's just if we leave it there, it starts to flatten. All right, so now I've got this kind of, uh, I've got some darks, got a little bit of light and some middle tones. But now I want to exaggerate the lights. So I look at the lightest area, which is right here. And I just concentrate in the middle. I can start to use contour to refine that shape. I also noticed that this tangent here of the lower part of the eye socket is much lower. Might be a good area to use your paper stomp. A little bit of light there. You know, when you get into a little area like that, sometimes it's best to hatch. I noticed that the teeth have light on one side and dark on the other. And then as we move into the front, they're mostly dark. I noticed that there's a cast shadow underneath the chin here on the bone. Here's what I was talking about with those little negative spaces in between the teeth. It's easier to just erase them out. And then draw the light on top. You notice that there actually is some linear detail there. And really start to focus the edges. And you know, at this point, there's a lot of stuff that you don't even need to blend. You might blend along the edge in some areas, but some of it you can just rest that light on top. And again, sometimes I exaggerate the light just so that I can see the form. In this case, it's lighter towards the middle of the bone, so I might put some light down, exaggerate it, and then blend it in. Again, I might exaggerate the crevice shadow, underneath the object by lightening it up a little bit more than it needs to be. to lighten that up. Work that shape back into where it should be. Remember, sometimes you can create texture just by using your chalk and not blending it. You can see I'm kind of tapping, changing directions, and then kind of tapping to blend, but not too much because you want to retain some of that. So sometimes the marks that you're making can suffice without being blended or manipulated too much. Okay, so this is about where we want to be for Monday. See you then.